Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here. I hope you're having a good new year so far. Thanks for tuning in to another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Jesu, du bist mein, which translates to Jesus, Jesus, thou art mine. Fairly straightforward chorale, really not too much to write home about. Most of the harmony is normative in regards to the fact that the progressions are what we would expect to see in a chorale, very textbook in that regard. Before I realized the fermata got placed over the wrong beat here. Fairly straightforward. We're just going to hop right into the analysis. So 2 flats in the key signature. We start on C minor. We end on C major, so I reckon the overall tonality of this chorale is C minor. This is just another case of Bach using a key signature that doesn't necessarily reflect the key in terms of our, contemporary relationship with key signatures, right? We would expect 3 flats. However, we find that Bach sort of flip-flops, especially in minor keys, between using the key signature that uses the natural 6th or the key signature that uses the raised 6th scale degree. So in C minor, sometimes we see 3 flats, sometimes we see 2 flats. In G minor, sometimes we see 1 flat, sometimes we see 2 flats. It's really a toss-up, but I feel like the majority of the time the key signature reflects the key. But we do stay in the key of C minor for the majority of the chorale. First cadence is a half cadence. We go from C minor to C minor over E flat, C, G, and G. So we'll just change the figured bass. C is a chord tone, so we don't need to reanalyze. D, F, and B natural is B diminished over D, which is 7/6. And when we see 1/6 going to 7/6, we typically expect 1 on the other side. C, E flat, G, and C. Tonic triad, root position. Moving over to our cadence, we have B natural, D, G, and D, which is 5/6, G major over B. Then we have C minor, C, C, G, and E flat, tonic triad, anticipation here in the melody, and then we cadence on 5, G major, G, C, G, and D, the C being a 4/3 suspension over the bass. Really common to see 4/3 suspensions over dominant triads especially. Next cadence is a perfect authentic cadence in the key of C minor, no modulations just yet. We start off with C minor, sort of realizing the resolution from the previous 5 chord, C, C, G, and E flat, tonic. And then we have another tonic triad, so we don't need to reanalyze. Passing tone in the lower voices, the bass and the tenor. And then we have A flat, C, F, and F, which is F minor over A flat. That's 4/6. And we have a passing tone here in the alto before we get A flat, C, A flat, and E. It's A flat major in root position. That's a 6 chord. Bit of an interesting progression here, 4/6 to 6. They're already very similar chords, so I kind of look at both of these chords as the same. With this passing 7th here, it's quite possible also that this is a 6/4/2 chord, and this A flat is sort of more of just like a lingering root, and then the G. Maybe not. Maybe now that I've talked myself through it, maybe this G is not the base of the chord. Regardless, the chord does resolve where we would expect, though, which is to 2 in first inversion. F, C, A flat, and D, which is D minor 7, flat 5. We know that Bach loves 2/6/5 chords, especially in cadential contexts. We move to 5 afterwards, G, B natural, G, and D. It's typically what we would expect after a 2/6/5 chord, passing 7th in the alto. E flat is a non-chord tone in the melody, and then we have this sort of double or like repeated tonic here, and it's going to be something that we see throughout the chorale. So this is really, we see the repeated tone, but the cadence sort of stops progressionally speaking on beat 3. C, G, E flat, and C, C minor, root position, and then we get it again where the phrase ends. Next phrase ends in a half cadence in the key of E flat major, so we see our first modulation here, and I believe it starts over another C minor chord, C, C, E flat, and G. which is, like I said, C minor again, which also happens to be 6 in the key of E flat, so I'm calling this a common chord modulation. Passing tone here in the alto before we get B flat, D, G, and G is G minor over B flat. A bit of an interesting progression here. A transitive progression is what I've been calling these, where they go against the grain of the cycle of falling fifths. Typically we expect roots to resolve down a fifth, but Bach goes either way and approaches the dominant just from either direction. So here we have 3, 6, and that takes us to A flat, E flat, C, and C, which is a 4 chord, A flat major in root position. We see 3 go to 4 pretty often. We have this passing tone here in the alto before we get E flat major over G, G, B flat, E flat, and B flat, which is our tonic in first inversion. Passing tone in the bass, and then we have E flat, B flat, F, and A flat. I reckon this E flat's an accented non-chord tone, and this D is actually the bass here, which would make this B flat 7 over D. It's 5, 6, 5. Again, sort of this pair of eighth notes here, or I guess pair of eighth note couples, and the non-chord tones being on the inner. Just because there's a bar line in between, we see this configuration quite often in Bach. But afterwards we resolve to our tonic, E flat, B flat, E flat, and G. That's E flat major. Anticipation here in the melody before we cadence on B flat major. B flat, D, and F, which is our dominant. Next phrase continues in the key of E flat major. We end this time in a perfect authentic cadence though. So 5 continues into another 5 chord, this time in first inversion, D, B flat, F, and B flat. So we can just change the figure bass, and B flat's a chord tone so we don't need to mark it. And then we have E flat, B flat, F, and G. This F is a 9/8 suspension over the bass. Very common to see 9/8 suspensions over root position tonics in the chorales. That takes us to A flat, C, E flat, and C, which is A flat major. That is our 4 chord. And then we have 3 voices moving off of the harmonic rhythm, which implies that most likely there's a subdivided chord progression going on here. And the text is a little tight here, so I'm going to use an arrow to point to where it's happening and just write it down here on the lower line. But this is a 5/4/2 chord, B flat 7 over A flat, and we have this A flat here in the bass, and we have B flat, F, and D here. Before that takes us to what we would expect to be a tonic triad in first inversion, G, B flat, G, and E flat, 1, 6. We also have 3 voices moving off of the harmonic rhythm here. We have A flat, C, F, and E flat, which is F minor in first inversion, or more specifically F minor 7 in first inversion because of this E flat here. We close in on the cadence next. We have B flat, E flat, and G, which is 1, 6, 4, our tonic triad in second inversion, a little neighbor tone here in the bass, and then we would expect this to go to 5, B flat, D, and F, which is our 5 chord, B flat major. Passing 7th, a little delayed passing 7th here in the tenor, and we have an anticipation here in the melody before we resolve to our tonic, E flat major, E flat, G, B flat, and E flat. And we've seen this structure before on the phrase before the last one we analyzed, where we have this sort of redundant, or I don't want to say redundant, maybe repeated chord, where it's just the same as the chord we had previously. And in the next phrase we end in a half cadence, and we're going to move back to the key of C minor. We start off with another E flat chord, E flat, B flat, E flat, and G. Neighbor tone here in the bass, and that takes us to an almost E flat major chord. We have E flat, C, E flat, and G, which is 6, 6. And I think that's also our gateway to the key of C minor, where it's now our 1, 6 chord. C is a chord tone, E flat is a chord tone, A, is a non-chord tone, sort of turns into melodic minor here, which is why I feel like this C minor chord is our gateway here. I'm going to use an arrow to show that this is a diminished chord over C, which would be 6/6 in the key of C minor, because, you know, melodic minor is what's going on right here. And that takes us to 7, D, D, F, and B natural, 7/6. This is kind of an interesting chord progression that's happening next, because it's actually kind of like what's going on in this progression here, where we have 4/6 going to 6, where we have two chords that are very similar in terms of their function that are happening on consecutive beats, but we have sort of a buffer tone here that separates them as individual ideas, rather than just taking the chord and not including anything in between them. So this A flat here is our chordal 7th, but it's a non-chord tone in this context, and that takes us to G, D, G, and B natural. And when we see 7 go to 5 or vice versa, it's really just a continuation of the same idea, because the chords have such similar functions and pitch content for that matter as well. So 7 going to 5 is really just one big dominant idea. And after this passing 7th here in the bass, we get a resolution to our tonic E flat, G, and C, which is 1/6. And we very briefly get root position here on the and of the beat before we get F, A flat, and D. It's 2/6, D diminished over F, and that takes us to our 5 chord, G major. F is also a chord tone here. It's the root of our chord. Oh, sorry, no, it's the third of the chord, so we don't need to mark it. G, D, G, and B natural before we get the same sort of cadential structure here, where we repeat our final cadence chord. All right. Next phrase, we get another half cadence in the key of C minor. We start off with C minor, E flat, G, and C. It's our tonic triad in root position. D is a passing tone. Then we have C, D, G, and D. Again, like we saw earlier, this pair of 2/8 notes, where the inner eighth notes are the accented, or they are the non-chord tones. The second of them is an accented non-chord tone because it falls on the beat. But this is G major over B natural, which is 5/6. And then we have C, G, and E flat, which is our tonic. G is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. D is a passing tone. And then we have C, E flat, G, and C, which is another C minor chord, and we need to reanalyze. Passing tones in the lower voices, one of them is a passing 7th. And here we're getting ready for our cadence. We have A flat, C, F, and F, which is F minor over A flat, that's 4/6. And then we get G, C, G, and E flat, which is C minor over G, which is 1/6/4. We've seen this in the past. It's a very common cadential formula, not the most, but pretty common. Neighbor tone in the bass, just like we saw earlier, and that takes us to 5. But this time it's different because we have a 4/3 suspension here in the tenor G, C, G, and D. Still implying our 5 chord though. Actually, I don't know where to draw the bracket to in this case. Maybe the bracket should be extended over this G chord because that's where the resolution occurs, but it doesn't really make too much of a difference all in all. Penultimate phrase ends in a half cadence. This time it's a Phrygian half cadence. We've seen a lot of half cadences consecutively here. We're still in the key of C minor. 5 takes us to 1, E flat, C, G, and C. More specifically 1/6. And then we get C minor in root position. We have C, we have E flat, we have G, and we have G. So we just changed the figure bass here. That takes us to F, C, G, and A flat, this G being a 9/8 suspension over the bass. Pretty interesting to see a 9/8 suspension over a non-tonic triad, but we see suspensions all the time over all sorts of different chords, just the 9/8 suspensions generally over the tonic triad. But after 4 we get G, B natural, F, and G. This F sort of looks like a 7/6 suspension over the bass, but I do actually think that it's our chord tone here. This is implying 5/7. But if this E flat looks like the chord tone to you, This could be 3/6, and this could actually be taking us to some semblance of a 4/6 chord. We don't exactly get 4/6, but we get pretty close to 4/6. We have A flat, C, E flat, and G, which is 6, 7. We have some non-chord tones here happening on the end of the beat, B natural and D. That takes us to A flat, C, C, and G. However, I do think this G is like kind of functioning like a 7/6 suspension almost over the bass, making this a 4/6 chord, probably the most common chord we see in Phrygian half cadences. It's always lingering somewhere around, but 6 going to 4 is one of the permutations that we see, because both of them sort of have this flat 6 of the scale in the bass, and then we cadence on 5. G major, G, B natural, D, and G. And for our last cadence, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of C minor. It's a fairly straightforward phrase. We go from 5 to 1, E flat, C, G, and C, which is 1/6. Neighbor tones in the bass and the alto before we get E flat, C, G, and G, so no need to reanalyze. C and E flat are both chord tones, but they briefly put the chord in root position and keep the chord intact, so I'll mark that. And then we get F, C, F, and A flat, which is our 4 chord, F minor. Passing tones in the outer voices here before we get A flat, C, and F, which is 4/6. And E flat and D are both non-chord tones. E flat's a chordal 7th, but F is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. And we're getting ready for our cadence here. So we have G, G, C, and E flat, which is 1/6/4. We've seen a lot of cadential 6/4 chords in this particular chorale. We then have G, G, B natural, and D, like we would expect a 1/6/4 chord to go to, some type of 5 chord. A little delayed passing 7th here. Anticipation here in the melody. And then we cadence on C major, C, E natural, G, and C. It's very common for Bach to end minor chorales with a major tonic triad. I think it has to do with Bach's relationship with major chords and them having more of a final quality to them, but it could also be because Bach wanted to end on a more uplifting note, and probably a bunch of other reasons I haven't thought of yet. But that's pretty much today's chorale. All in all, fairly straightforward, nothing too out of the ordinary. Yeah, I don't really think there's too much in this chorale that I wanted to comment on. All the harmony is fairly straightforward. If you taught harmony, this would be a pretty good chorale to choose, because all the chords are more or less typical in terms of the way they're operating. So I think on that note, I'm going to cap the video off on that thought. If you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification icon and like the video if you like the content as well. Thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.